Okay. Enough of me. Our speaker tonight is going to be Mr. Wade Miller. Mr. Miller served in the United States Marine Corps. He is an infantry combat veteran with multiple deployments, including Iraq and the Horn of Africa. After completing his military service, he enrolled at the University of Texas at Dallas and majored in political science. While attending university, Wade served as Bill Archer Fellow and as an intern for the president of the Heritage Foundation, Dr. Edwin J. Fuller. After completing his internship, he went on to the American Enterprise Institute, American Enterprise Institute, Summer Institute. The Heritage Action for America will hold Congress accountable to conservative principles. They take the conservative policy visions outlined by their sister organization, the Heritage Foundation, and make them a reality. The Heritage Action ensures members of Congress hear directly from their constituents, including over 700,000 members of the Heritage Foundation and millions of others around the country who believe in their principles and share the vision of America's future. This time I'd like to welcome Mr. Wade Miller.
I'm going to leave my phone up here and on because I've got a few notes. My presentation basically has to change every single week because what's happening in DC changes on a weekly basis. Some of you know me, a lot of you don't. Some of you are wondering why I have this stuff all over my face. My wife made me do the No Shave November challenge. I suspect it's because she wants to make fun of me at how bad my beard is at the end of the month. But normally when you see me, I'll be freshly shaven. It's nice to see a lot of friends here. David Watts, Ray Wheelis, we're friends on Facebook. I enjoy your posts, and Cindy and Stace, and I mean, there's a lot of people here that I know, and or I know through social media, Twitter and Facebook. So thank you very much for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are, the who, what, when, where, and then move on into a legislative update. And then at that point, I will open it up for questions and anything federal related, so DC related, I can address. We don't do state, although as an individual, I'm very interested in what's happening at the state level, but we don't directly as an organization get involved at that level. So who here has heard of the Heritage Foundation? So it's fairly well known, public policy think tank that's been around for about 40 years. They really became prominent during the Reagan administration. In fact, during Reagan's first cabinet meeting, he put in front of every single cabinet member the mandate for leadership. And this was a document that basically said, if we want to fix government in the United States of America, here's the things we want to do. It's about a 2,000-page document, so it was very substantial. Within a couple of years, the Reagan administration got done about 60–65% of that, and that fostered a relationship where we worked directly with the Reagan administration very heavily throughout his time there. And in fact, a lot of Reagan administration officials, after Reagan left office, came over to the Heritage Foundation, and many of them are still there, actually. Ed Meese, who is Reagan's Attorney General, is in charge of our legal department, and we have a lot of other analysts as well. The Heritage Foundation works on public policy. They create ideas. Some of them are awesome, some of them are so-so, some of them upon further research, we decide that they're not really that good, and we jettison them. But overall, their job is to create ideas and then work with members of Congress to see if they can put that in legislative form and then get it passed. This was a very effective model for the longest time. It started to slowly become less effective as the lobbyist class in DC became more prominent and started spending more money to influence what was happening in DC. And we saw this come to a head with Obamacare. So when this was going on, when Obamacare was being written and formulated, what was effectively happening is every single lobbyist, every single industry group, every single K Street person, anyone that could possibly benefit from this law was in Congress. And they were saying, look, if you give me this carve out, if you give me this deal, this subsidy, this guaranteed consumer base, we will throw our support behind you. This was something that the conservative movement was just not positioned to counter. Now, there were some groups at the time doing what we do, and they were doing a good job. There just wasn't enough of that. And so that's when Heritage decided, we need to take the next step. We need to get involved, not just on riding policy, but we need to get involved in the grassroots movement, work hand in hand with the Tea Party, actually start affecting and influencing members of Congress and turning up the heat on those who don't want to go our way, and then working with and supporting the members who do. And so that's when they decided to create Heritage Action. And what we do is we have an inside-outside unit. So we have government relations individuals who work directly with members of Congress, talk to them about policies, give them all the talking points of why this is good or bad and why they should be on our side. And then there's individuals like myself who work in certain regions, and I used to cover all of Texas, all of Oklahoma, parts of Louisiana, and parts of Kansas, so a pretty big region. My region is now North Texas, Oklahoma, and parts of Kansas. We actually just hired in the Houston area. He's going to be taking over South Texas and then Louisiana. But our job is to work with conservatives, Republicans, libertarians, Tea Party, constitutionalists, 912, anything right of center to make sure they know what's going on in DC, that they have the talking points that they need, and then so they can actually work with their members of Congress, talk to their networks. We call it know, grow, go. Know the issues, grow your network, and then go out and affect change. We're actually going to play a short video real quick. He'll cue it up here, and this kind of describes what we do in a nutshell, very short video.
I just felt crippled with fear and inaction. And I remember every morning I'd fall to my knees in prayer next to the bed, asking God, what can I do to make this better? How can I be part of the solution, not part of the problem? 5 years ago, when my husband and I retired, we had this long-range plan when we first got married to retire after 30 years of work. And it was the McCain-Obama campaign in 08. And I could see that the political winds were favoring Obama, and that was a scary thing. And we had a market crash. And so half of the things that we had saved on paper were now wiped out. So I started to venture over to my local GOP in hopes of finding something to do for the election. There was really nothing going on there. It was very disheartening. I was just looking for some way to make a difference and do something. Well, I've been a long-time member of the Heritage Foundation. So I was personally contacted by Russ Vought and Jessica Anderson when Heritage Action was just starting up. And they were looking for activists to write letters to the editor on the Affordable Health Care Act. So I said that I would, and they provided me some wonderful research and talking points to help me craft my letter. I submitted the letter, it was published, and our relationship grew from there. They do the same with each Sentinel. It's a very personal relationship they develop with Sentinels, and that's what separates them from all the other organizations out there that I've tested. There's all these tools in an activist tool chest, and Heritage Action is there to teach activists how to use those tools. Now I look forward to the future because I know that I'm making a difference. As a Sentinel, we have our voices heard individually. And when you add up our team with all the other teams that are growing across this country as Sentinels, we're going to be a force to be reckoned with. And we will be heard in DC and help shape policy and help take our country back to its founding principles.
So that's Jenny. She's actually a good friend of mine. She's not in this region, but we've become good friends since I've been doing this for about 3 years now. So I am not a fundraiser. I mean, if we have donors in here, thank you very much for donating to Heritage Action, the Heritage Foundation. But my job is not to raise money. My job is not to plaster our name all over everything. My job is to be a resource for conservatives to make sure that they know what's going on in DC so that they can cut through the spin. And I'm going to give some examples when we do a legislative update of the kind of understanding that we have of what's going on with the legislative process in DC and how they're using gimmicks and tricks to kind of deceive voters in a number of ways, actually. But that's not all we do. So in fact, we do provide trainings, we do social media trainings, we talk with members about how do we conduct town halls, how do we make phone calls to members of Congress, do we call, email, fax, do we go visit them in office, do we use certified mail, when would we want to use those and for what reasons, how do we write letters to the editor, op-eds. I'm here to be a resource for anything activist related and try to figure out how can we do it better and more efficient. You mentioned social media. That is one of the best tools we have out there to really make a difference. In fact, a study just came out from a university, and they determined by interviewing all sorts of members of Congress and their top staffers, that if you can have just 30 tweets that are substantive on an issue that they're voting on soon, that's not just kind of a nebulous, balance the budget type of comment, but more to the point of, this is a bad budget deal, don't raise the debt ceiling, and here's why type of issue. That will elevate, just 30 tweets will elevate it to the member of Congress, and they'll start taking a look at that and considering where the activist base is in their community. Now, obviously this is a good district. You're represented very well here, one of the better voting members of Congress, one of the more honest people in DC. But, he will not always be in that seat. We have to plan for the future, and we have to put in place all the tools and accountability options, because you're represented by more than just Louis Gohmert. You have 2 senators, you have state reps, state senators, municipalities. The things we teach apply everywhere. We just focus personally on the issues in DC, but all the skills we train on and teach on, those will apply universally. So I'm going to go over a little bit of a legislative update here. Well, it's actually quite a bit. Just to kind of let you know what's going on. If you have questions, try to remember them and hold them onto them until the end. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the debt ceiling and the budget deal that just went through. So essentially what just happened is Congress, Boehner made a last-minute deal where he was going to raise the debt ceiling. Actually, they didn't raise the debt ceiling. They actually suspended it for 2 years. So there's no debt ceiling at all right now. The Congress technically could increase spending as much as they wanted, and there's nothing legislatively in law that would stop that. So they've raised the debt ceiling for 2 years until, I think, March of 2017. Part of this deal was also to get rid of the budget caps that are in place, which restrict spending to certain levels. So not only did they increase the debt ceiling, but they've increased the spending levels by about $90 billion a year. They have some gimmick accounting in there. Part of what they're doing is they're selling off the strategic oil reserves. Part of it is they're raiding Social Security to fund other aspects. It's a terrible deal, and Boehner himself said he was shoveling out the barn. And my boss's reply to this was, yes, but he's shoveling it onto the American people, and his language is a little bit more colorful than that. But you can see where I'm going with this, and that's exactly what happened. They basically punted on this issue, which took away several major leverage points for the next 2 years for Republicans to hold Obama accountable on issues. So without key leverage points, it really makes it harder for us to do anything. You can put forward a bill tomorrow that defunds Planned Parenthood, but if it's not on a bill that has some leverage, a major piece of legislation or a continuing resolution or a budget, then it's what we call a show vote. They're putting it out there to make it look like they're doing something when they really aren't. And when this was done purposefully to get rid of these key strategic leverage points. So that was a really bad deal. It passed with a minority of Republicans and all Democrats basically voting for this. Boehner used the minority and a handful of Republicans to get this pushed through. Now, the next bill I'm going to talk about was a reconciliation bill. Now, by the way, this is all going to be doom and gloom. I will come back around on the backside of this and kind of paint out a picture of why this is actually a good sign, even though that these are bad specific bills. But there was a reconciliation bill. What the reconciliation bill did is it was a bill that said it was a partial repeal of Obamacare, and it also had a mechanism in there to defund Planned Parenthood. Now, this sounds great until you dig down deep into what is actually going on here, and it's actually terrible. Even though we fully support repealing Obamacare, and of course we fully support defunding Planned Parenthood. But let's backtrack to last spring. In order for Republicans to pass the budget deal, McConnell had to promise conservatives they would use reconciliation to fully repeal Obamacare. At the same time, the Chamber of Commerce was putting out language saying that we should not fully repeal Obamacare. Instead, we should try to get rid of the worst parts and then just fix it. And by the way, all the worst parts were the parts that were just applicable to businesses. It didn't affect the insurance regulations. It didn't affect the Medicare expansion, which are the parts that are affecting us as consumers the most. They left that completely out. They didn't care about that. So fast forward, McConnell promised us, and McConnell's the Senate Majority Leader, he promised us a full repeal on Obamacare. So when the reconciliation bill came out, to our surprise, it was only a partial repeal. So McConnell went back on his promise, and this is not something new. He's actually lied to conservatives 2 other times recently. And so anyone that remembers Ted Cruz calling out Mitch McConnell for lying, he hasn't just lied once. McConnell's lied to conservatives 3 times, and we have documented evidence of all 3 instances. But this bill partially repealed only the parts that affected businesses, and these were all bad provisions, we agree. The reason this was a terrible idea is because once Republicans start going with the narrative of partial repeal, it feeds into the Democrats saying that, look, let's work together and fix the law. And it deflates our argument that we need to fully repeal. So we're giving them the narrative and the argument next year when we're facing these issues again to downplay our expectations. But here's the real kicker and why this was such a bad deal, is because in order to use reconciliation, which I won't go too much in the weeds here, but reconciliation means that the Senate can pass something that's budgetary in nature with only 51 votes. So that's really important. For the longest time, Republicans have been saying we can't repeal Obamacare, even though they've had leverage to do so on continuing resolutions and other spending bills. And their argument has been, we need a Republican president. So now, the reason they say that is because they want to use reconciliation with a Republican president in place so they can push through a reconciliation bill to get rid of Obamacare, just like they used reconciliation to pass Obamacare originally. So this has been their argument for years now in order to not do anything about it in the past. So the reason this is a terrible thing is because reconciliation is a very complicated process. There's parliamentarian issues, there's Byrd Rule issues. The language is not perfect and you don't take all of these different technical aspects into account, it could get knocked down, meaning you can't do it. The parliamentarian will just say, look, it's not germane, you can't do this. So what we really needed this year, and the reason conservatives wanted a full repeal to reconciliation, not a partial repeal, is because if it failed, we would know why, and it would be a test run. And that way, when it came up the next time with a Republican president, we'd know how to do it. So effectively, we've lost our test run. The Republicans didn't do it, and now we're going in blind the next time. We don't learn anything from a partial repeal if it fails, because as a partial repeal, it's a totally different ordeal than if you consider the entire bill as one package. So they're dealing with it in several different packages now, like 5 or 6 different issues. If any of those go down, it's not instructive to us on a bigger, comprehensive effort. So they completely punted on our real important test run to fully repeal Obamacare. So that's not, and so that's, if you understand everything that's going on in a very technical nature, this indicates that they may not be trying to go for a full repeal, and instead they're going to put their eggs in the partial repeal, get rid of the parts that are most burdensome to their big donor class, and not necessarily the parts about the insurance regulations, Medicaid expansion that affects us as consumers. So that's a problem. The other problem was so let me backtrack to the CR that happened about a month ago, a continuing resolution. That is the appropriations bills that actually sets in approved spending levels, or spending amounts. They tried to do a defunding of Planned Parenthood in that bill. Eventually they caved, and they signed a continuing resolution that fully funded Obamacare. This went through with Republicans voting in lockstep with Democrats to get this done. Their argument was, well, we'll use reconciliation. The problem is that reconciliation has no teeth. As a process, Obama can just veto it, and there's no consequence. There's no leverage, there's not a shutdown, it's not a major piece of legislation that affects other issues. So they put, their excuse for caving on that was to do it on reconciliation. Well, that's a fake effort. That's what we call a show vote, because there's just no technical way, unless Obama becomes a pro-life president all of a sudden, There's no way to make that actually get defunded. And actually, as a technical process, you can't fully defund it through reconciliation anyways, because it doesn't, there's mandatory spending, and then there's discretionary spending. And a reconciliation bill can only touch the mandatory spending, whereas a continuing resolution can touch all of the spending. So this was very problematic. Now, the reason that they're doing it on the reconciliation bill is so that they can say, look, we've tried now twice, it failed. And then when we get to the continuing resolution that was passed about a month ago is a short-term continuing resolution. That ends on December 11th. Now, they picked that on purpose because that's right before Christmas. Everyone's in a hurry to go home for Christmas break. Nothing serious gets done at that point. They're always in a hurry, and people cave left and right. The reason that they put the Planned Parenthood defunding on the reconciliation bill is so that they could then not do it on the next continuing resolution, which is actually the only way we could actually get that done. Now, there were some Texas pro-life groups out there. Texas Right to Life fully supported our effort to defund this on the continuing resolution. Texas Alliance for Life out there opposed that, wanted us to fight this on reconciliation. Even though I pointed out to them this was technically false, they insisted that we didn't defund it to the continuing resolution, and actually encouraged us to pass the CR that funded Planned Parenthood. So if you're out there monitoring the state level pro-life groups, keep an eye on that. So that's a big problem right now. Let me go back to my notes here. So another issue that's come up is the Export-Import Bank. Now, to a lot of people, this is a very small government agency, and people wonder, why are you spending so much time on the Export-Import Bank? The reason is because it's the poster child of corporate welfare. And basically what it does is it takes our tax dollars, gives it out to businesses to fund their exports. And a lot of these exports go to China and other countries, Iran even. And so here's the problem. If the exports get paid back, that in fact, the importer actually pays us back, the company gets to keep it. If they don't, if they default on those loans, that comes back on us, the taxpayer. And if you do a fair market accounting, this program actually loses money, and it's putting all of the risk on us as consumers. Now, it's not a huge amount in the grand scheme of things. It's about $2 billion in losses every 10 years, but the amount of money that's going out to these corporations is gigantic. It's like $140 billion in outstanding loans right now. It's increasing. We actually caused this. This is an FDR-era progressive program, by the way. It's been around for a very long time. Conservatives actually had probably what I would consider the only major legislative victory several months ago in making and seeing that this shut down. It expired and they didn't renew it. There's efforts going on right now to bring it back. And in fact, what we saw in the House was Stephen Fincher, who's a Republican, he signed a discharge petition. This is a very rare process in the House. It basically gets around all the normal avenues that a bill would get through to the floor. If 218 members of the House sign this discharge petition, then it comes to the floor. So Stephen Fincher, with about 40 other Republicans, and all of the Democrats bypassed the will of the majority of the Republican Party, brought this to the floor and put it out there for a vote. Now, one of the reasons one of our big pushes is on corporate welfare is because if you understand how DC operates, this type of stuff is how the lobbyists keep in the game, and they affect legislation and they get special favors for corporations. If you can shut down the Export-Import Bank, if you can shut down the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, if you can shut down tax extenders, most of them, MTVs, I won't go into the technicalities of what all that is, earmarks, etc. You're shutting off the excuses and reasons for lobbyists and the Chamber of Commerce and all these other groups in DC to actually spend all this money to get their way, because there's less ability for Congress to give out special privileges. So one of the best ways for the conservatives to start winning these battles is to starve this beast. And so the Export-Import Bank is kind of step one in that process. Well, I would say step two. Step one was earmarks. There's now an earmark ban in effect. Senator DeMint at the time was one of the people who led that charge to end earmarks. And so that's one of the reasons we're really fighting on that issue. Unfortunately, the establishment is pushing back on this. Like I said, Boehner basically greenlit that discharge petition and looked the other way and allowed them to do that. It's going to go to the Senate. Now, they're not going to bring this up specifically, but what McConnell is going to do is allow it to be added as an amendment to the transportation bill. Now, what does an export-import bank have to do with the transportation bill? I don't know. But the problem is both bills are actually bad. So the transportation bill is a bailout of billions of dollars of bailout for a failed transportation, highway transportation program. We actually want to get rid of it altogether and then return all of the revenue collecting and decision making to the states. They can decide where their highways are going to be built and how they want to do it. Right now, we get a whole bunch of money from the federal government that we give to them. So we give them all this money and then they give it back to us. And by the way, we give back way less than we actually pay in. Texas is a donor state. So if we got these decisions pushed back to us, we'd actually be able to spend less while creating more roads and bridges. Part of the reason is because at the federal level, there's so many mandates and there's so many stipulations. So a certain percent have to go to beautification projects. Now, I don't know about you, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm more concerned about being able to get somewhere on time than if it looks perfect. Some of this goes to mass transit, so cities have to build mass transit whether they need it or not, instead of roads or highways. A lot of money is earmarked for this. We want this all to go away, but long story short, even though that's a bad bill by itself, they're compounding that by putting the Export-Import Bank in there. So that's a terrible deal. Now, I want to talk real quick about the impeachment of the IRS commissioner. Now, this is a great thing. I know a lot of people, I have a lot of good friends who are directly targeted by the IRS, but this is really important to understand. The reason they announced this about a week ago is because everything else I'm talking about was really bad. They're throwing this out there in order to kind of distract us. Now, what a conservative speaker would have done is said that we intend on doing this, but first we need to deal with these issues. We're going to get to this, and we're going to bring up the impeachment of the IRS commissioner in January, after we get back from Christmas. The reason they're throwing it out right now is to distract a lot of the Tea Party groups who have been targeted from the bad debt ceiling deal, the bad budget. They're punting on continuing resolutions and other things. Now, I've put out a lot of bad information, or negative information about what's going on, and everyone's probably like, oh, this is terrible. And yet it is terrible, but it's important to understand that we had to kind of expect it was going to come to this place. So if you go back to 2008, 2009, 2010, when the Tea Party first came about, the establishment class clung right onto us. And I was with the Tea Party from the very beginning. I saw this happen. I didn't expect it would be as bad as it was, but they all wanted to pretend like they were Tea Party members. They supported us. I remember a lot of establishment Republicans were speaking at our events back in 2010, who will never come to Tea Party meetings now, of course. But they wanted to control us, and they thought that if they could get on our good side, they would be able to steer this angst in their favor and benefit, and sure enough, in 2010, it benefited them electorally. I would say that it benefited us as well, but they were trying to manipulate and push us in the right direction. So what happens is in the old way of doing things in DC, it took conservatives, this is pre-social media. It would take conservatives, in a lot of respects pre-internet really, but the establishment would do something that was bad. It would take, the way we used to have to do this is we'd get on our phones, we'd call our friends and tell them what's going on. We'd have a meeting once a month, and maybe that meeting's not for 3 or 4 weeks. Eventually we had emails, and those would go out, but we get so many emails that some people don't even open those. So it would take us months to react. What's going on now with social media is what used to take us months now takes 48 hours, sometimes hours, to get the word out and to really get the conservative base behind something. The establishment hasn't figured out how to counteract this. They can't control it, and they're confused. And so, rather than try to work with us, and this is where we're at right now, they're trying to minimize us. They're trying to villainize us. This is why when you see Ted Cruz standing up on principle and fighting the good fight, they say he's grandstanding. He's just trying to raise money. He's calling Senator McConnell a liar, and that's against Senate decorum. Whether or not it's true or not doesn't matter to them. So we see all these narratives, and then they start talking about how we need a government, and we need a compromise, and we need to be bipartisan. These are loaded terms which are not being used in their proper understanding. For instance, let me talk about compromise. Compromise is not inherently a good thing. It's actually inherently neutral. Depends on what's in the compromise. So for example, and I think the reason this is a problem is because as kids we're taught that compromise is a good thing, share, blah, blah, blah. But as adults we need to understand that this is a neutral term. An example I'll give you is if Democrats want to build a bridge across the Grand Canyon, Republicans don't, the compromise would be to build it halfway. That's a terrible deal. We should not do that. Another thing is governing. So what they will say is we need to be seen to be governing. And what they really mean by that term is that we need to keep up the status quo. We don't want any friction. We don't want any anything that would upset stability. And the way I define governing is pushing for reforms that will actually benefit the Republic, secure our liberties, and create prosperity for the American people. Right now, the establishment doesn't want to break any eggs and actually do anything difficult that might upset the status quo. Another one that I constantly hear from the establishment class is, we don't have the votes. Well, that's just not true. We absolutely do have the votes. And you see this on budget arguments, left and right. Obama will never sign this. We don't have enough votes in the Senate to overcome it. And so from a budgetary stance, what they're basically saying is, Obama wants us to do something, therefore we have to do it. When in reality, Obama doesn't have the votes to force through what he wants. Republicans completely control the power of the purse, and yet left and right, they have abandoned that as a tool to push for serious reforms. And we've seen this in education. For instance, let me throw this out there, this will shock a lot of you. Republicans actually voted down an amendment on the education bill that will allow states to opt out of all federal mandates. Texas actually did pretty good on this. You go up to Oklahoma, these are very conservative districts. Tom Cole and Frank Lucas, they voted against that. This is one of the reddest states in the country. And so a lot of people, they criticize Heritage Action because we're always tough on our own party. And the reason we're tough on our own party is because our own party is the problem. Everything that we want to get done, right now the Democrats are not the hurdle. The Republican Party is a hurdle to getting most of these things done. Now, we want to shift the fight to Democrats. And the Export-Import Bank is a great example of this. What better issue than to turn the narrative on its head than to talk about how Democrats are huge supporters of corporate welfare? Now, you would think that if you're in the RNC or the GOP leadership, you would think, that's brilliant. We can talk about how Hillary Clinton supports the Export-Import Bank and corporate welfare and funding the 1%. That's a narrative we want to use. But they didn't. They don't grab onto this. So our biggest hurdle is the Republican Party. And as my boss says, he went to D.C. to fight Democrats. But if he has to push through Republicans in order to do that, then he will. And right now, there's a lot of really good people on our side. Louis Gohmert's one, Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, Rand Paul. There's a lot of members that are on our side. The problem is that we're still up against, kind of like in Austin, actually. Conservatives are a minority. Until we push through that, and until the establishment wing of the Republican Party decides to work with us, whether it's transportation, whether it's tax reform, whether it's education, whether it's agricultural policy, you name it. Not one issue that has gone through the Senate would have come out substantially very different if Harry Reid were still in power. And so when Ted Cruz said that Mitch McConnell has been a very effective Democratic speaker, or a Democratic leader, some of that was rhetoric. But the fact is that a lot of it wasn't, because that's substantively very true. Mitch McConnell could be doing a lot in our favor, but he has decided not to. Now, let me see where I'm at on time here. Let me talk about the speaker's race real quick. So a lot of people are down. Some people really like Paul Ryan, and some people think that the House Freedom Caucus caved. I think it's very important to remember that the conservative wing, and especially the Tea Party, turned up the heat for so long that they effectively caused Boehner to leave. Now, he retired, but everyone in D.C. understands exactly what happened, and that he would have been vacated after doing everything he just did right now in the last couple of weeks by the House Freedom Caucus and the conservative wing of the party. So he basically saw that his number was up and that it was time to go. That was a significant success of the Tea Party movement. It shows that the establishment class is really feeling the heat. Now, they're paying us back with this bad legislation, but they're on the run right now. And if we keep up the heat, that's going to continue. And you also have to look, who is the next person in line? Kevin McCarthy. He was also pushed away. They saw that he did not have a path to success. Who else were they considering? Jason Chaffetz, Scalise. These are people that the House Freedom Caucus also pushed away. So while some people are upset about Paul Ryan, and I certainly have shared some concerns about his support for open borders, his position against using the power of the purse to advance our issues, and several other issues. He voted, supported TARP and a lot of other things in the past. We have to remember that we effectively staved off 4 or 5 other opponents at the same time. That's a huge success. Right now, with basically, you could make an argument there's 60 to 90 conservatives in the House. That's a very small minority, about a quarter of the entire, less than a quarter actually, of the entire House. They're having an enormous impact, and things are moving our direction. I see this especially at the state level. Austin's becoming conservative very quickly, and that's great, and it's only a matter of time until that translates to DC as well. I see a lot of really good state senators, state reps, who, when Republicans who are maybe not as conservative as they could be decide to retire those open seats, these are people who will go there and actually make a big difference. So one of the ways that, and then I'm going to open it up for questions, but one of the ways we track members of Congress is through our scorecard. We rate them. It's a full spectrum conservative scorecard, 0 to 100%. I think Cruz has 100% right now. Lee has 100%. I'm not sure in the House. I'll have to look at the House. Gohmert's well above 90%. Ratcliffe is well above 90%. So with the exception of Cornyn, you're fairly well represented on our scorecard in this area. Cornyn, I think, is actually at the bottom of our Republicans on that list right now, somewhere in the 50s range. Now, this is really low for him. He was in the 70s last session. I don't know if this is a side effect of him being in leadership and having to go along with what Mitch McConnell does. Either way, his voting record is really unacceptable. He just voted for this budget deal that increased the debt ceiling for 2 years, or actually eliminated the debt ceiling, which will cost us $1.5 trillion, and all these other bad votes that he's been a part of. But the scorecard is a really good resource. If you go to the scorecard and you click on the state, you can click on members specifically. It'll show you all the votes, and we key vote a lot of things. We try not to over key vote one issue, so we're not going to have 40 key votes on Obamacare. We're going to try to do 1 or 2 on that issue. We'll get, the pro-life issues. If there's, Second Amendment issues, we'll get there. But we sprinkle it on every issue so that you have a pretty good understanding of where that member stands on all the major issues in a comprehensive conservative score. Now, that's not perfect. The scorecard is just a starting place, and this is where we like to have a conversation with you, because you can have a really good score on our scorecard, but effectively you're not doing anything to advocate or push for this victory. So we have a few members, and I'm not going to name them by name, who are hovering right around or above 90% on their scorecard. But if you go to their Facebook page, if you go to their Twitter accounts, yes, they're voting right at the last second. They're voting our way, and that's great. But they're not out there actually advocating. They're not out there like Cruz and Gohmert, who are constantly advocating for what we actually have to do, what the right path is, why this is a good or bad bill. Showing up and just voting isn't enough. We need these members, especially if they're in very conservative Republican districts, advocating for the issue itself, making the case. So a really good example of this, and then this really will be the last part and I'll get to questions, was on our effort to defund Planned Parenthood on the CR about a month ago. About 2 months before that, we came out with the Mulvaney letter. And the Mulvaney letter basically said, was a pledge that we wanted members of Congress to sign. It said, if you sign this, you're saying that you will not sign any funding CR budget unless it defunds Planned Parenthood. We ended up getting about 40 or 50 people to sign that. The problem is that at the end of the, when it came down to the vote on the CR itself, we had a lot of members vote our way. A lot of them were not on this bill. They voted the right way at the last second. They weren't letting people know how they were going to vote until they voted. If you're not out there advocating and making the case for why this is the right thing to do, you're not out there trying to influence other members of Congress, going into their offices and telling them, hey, look, we need you on this, then you're just not doing what we elected you to go up there and do as conservatives. And I'll give a shout out to, again, to Cruz and Gohmert. These two individuals are probably some of the best at not just being right on the issue, but making it a part of their job to go out and talk to other members and convince them. Gohmert and Cruz do this all the time, and that's awesome. And we need more members doing that, and we just don't see it from most of the Texas delegation, even members who do vote the right way. So part of my job in closing, before we get to questions, is to make sure that you know all these things. And I've thrown out a ton of stuff out here. And so I understand that you're not going to remember everything that I said, and nor should you probably. That's for people like me who just study this stuff all day long. Some of you might have understood and might retain it all. But I'm here to fill in those gaps. So if you forget part of this and you want to go talk to your member of Congress about Planned Parenthood and where they're at, give me a call, send me an email, shoot me a Facebook message, because we will have those conversations. I want to get you to where you can actually know more about that issue than the member of Congress, so that when you go in there, what will generally happen, in my experience, is you go in there, you talk about an issue, and not Gomer, he's not going to do this to you, but a lot of members will try to up-talk you, and they'll throw out technical terms and try to make you sound like you have no idea what you're talking about. And so my goal with all of our Sentinels, and those are the activists we work with, is to make sure they understand those arguments so that they can push past them and know more about that issue and then put them on the defensive. Nothing makes me happier than when I hear about a Sentinel going to visit a member of Congress after we've talked for about an hour on an issue or 30 minutes, and they go in there and tell me about how this member of Congress was backpedaling because it was clear he had no idea what was in the bill, and they knew all about it. That puts a member of Congress in a position that we want them in, which is listening to us and being transparent and answering to us on issues. So with that, I will close. I've got some materials on that back table, but I think we have a mic back here that we're going to pass around. This one? Okay, that'll work. Okay. So if anyone has a question on any issue, federal related, I'll try to answer. If I don't know it, I'll get back to you, but I should know most of the stuff that's going on right now. Test. Okay.
Are we on?
Yes.
On Cornyn, I can't say how bitterly disappointed I am in him. I wouldn't even call him a rhino, I'd call him a chameleon. Because he imitates a conservative occasionally and just stabs us in the back. What can I do as an individual to see that a true conservative is in his post next time? And I will do most anything that I could. I had one other question.
So let me answer this and we'll get to your second question. Okay. So we don't do campaigns. However, I will say that turning up the heat on them on substantive policy issues is generally where they're the most vulnerable. If you can demonstrate to a lot of people in your network that they don't know the issue or they're on the wrong side of an issue, and you can explain why, and that's what we're here to help, and then you let other people know, that turns up the heat on them, makes them accountable. Now, we just want them to understand you to do whatever you think in your network is necessary. If you think that they need to be replaced, that's up to you. If you think that they need to improve their voting record and that we can work with them to do that, then we'll leave that to you. We're just here to make sure you understand the arguments and then train you on how to turn up the heat so that that type of transformation, or if you decide to replace them with someone else, is possible. But we don't do directly campaigns.
Okay, and quickly, the selling of the oil reserves, where were those reserves, A, and B, to whom were they sold?
I'm going to answer this one. I'm going to punt on this one a little bit because I don't know the specifics of that, although if you send me an email, I can get to you. So I'm not sure where they're being sold to. I think that there's a market for this, which is how it happens. But generally speaking, the purpose of the strategic oil reserve is emergency situations, especially if we're at war and we're having difficulty with our oil reserves and making sure that we have all the oil we need. Now, there might be someone in here who's in the oil industry that knows this a little bit better than I. So here's the big problem with this is that they're planning on selling it at $87 a barrel. And so they factored that into their budgetary issues, but anyone who's following the cost of oil knows that it's about half of that. And all the indications are in the near term that oil is going to stay fairly low. A lot of this is because OPEC and some of these other countries are hoping to make fracking and some of the drilling that we're doing right now go out of business so that they can raise prices back up. And anyone who's following the drilling that's going on right now knows that the oil levels are costs are so low. So this in and of itself is a gimmick because they're pretending to sell it in the future for a price that is just unlikely. So this is a fake budgetary gimmick, but it's also something that I think that strategically is unwise. We should have that in place just in case, although some